psychedelics right now for mental health and addiction is the only positive story that we have right now in society.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Trade to Black podcast. Today, it's psychedelic time. We're talking psychedelics as one of the best thought leaders in the space. But before we get into this week's podcast, we want to hear from you. Where do you think this industry is going? From an investment standpoint, it's been at a standstill for quite some time. Are you still involved? Do you still have interest? Do you want to see where this is going to go to? Leave a comment below and ask us questions that you want asked from some of the best thought leaders. We'll get those questions out and we'll get that information back to you, because at the end of the day, we would not be here without you. As usual, if you like what we produce, subscribe to our channel, click on that bell for all notifications, and very much appreciative if you can share this with your network. As usual, before we get into this week's podcast, all views on the Trade to Black podcast and the guests on this podcast are purely opinion. You should not treat any opinions expressed by us or our guests as investment advice, and the views on this podcast are solely intended to be informational and are not investment advice. Okay, let's begin. He's been on the podcast a few times. Guy's got the best style around. Zappy Zapolin joins us once again. Zappy, great to have you back on. How you making out lately?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm excited for this because, as you know, we're gearing up for our industry event here, November 3rd to 5th. Wonderland is coming to Miami, and this is a big deal because you've got all the Wall Street firms, you've got all the psychedelic companies, you've got the thought leaders, everybody's in this one place. And it literally last year, the deal flow and the opportunities and the partnerships that came out of it was incredible. And now here we are a year later, and all this incredible science has been done. So the industry's really moved forward, but maybe not the stocks per se. And I think this is just going to be one of those events where, you're going to be on the ground meeting with and talking with the best of the best companies that are going to be the pharma companies from the 1920s or the biotech companies from the 1990s. Wow. Yeah. So
I want to dive into that. But before we get into that, I want to welcome in our lead financial writer, Benjamin A. Smith. Ben, back from California. Got a little bit of a tan. How are things?
Things are really well. It's kind of hard to beat Zappy's intro there, but things are great. Excited for both cannabis and psychedelics that we're going to speak about today, and the conference next month should be great.
One thing's for sure, we got to move to Miami because look at this tan. Man, you're glowing right now, Zappy.
I've been telling people for 20 years, you got to come down to Miami. And then, post-pandemic, about half the people did listen to me and come down. But you guys, there's plenty of room, and the sun's always out, 365.
Yeah. Well, as you said, Microdose is putting on their big psychedelic conference. It's coming up, I think it's like less than 2 weeks. 2 weeks from today, or 2 weeks from, Thursday, November 3rd is when it kicks off. But let's touch on what you talked about before, right off the top. Why should, I think, investors be interested in this conference that takes place? Because as you said a year ago, there's a lot of deals that take place. Do you anticipate further growth and more people showing up this year versus last?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a much better time for investors right now because as somebody like myself, where I've seen some of these bubbles burst, I was working on Wall Street at Drexel Burnham and that bubble burst. And then I was working in the .com space in 2000, the bubble burst. And each time that happens, it basically just shakes out all the garbage and the cream rises to the top. And so we're in another one of these situations where in the last year, a lot of garbage came in. A lot of people just wanted to make money promoting psychedelic related stocks, making up, hey, we're going to do psilocybin mushrooms for weight loss or this or that with no real experience, no positioning. So now all this incredible science was paid for by the crypto industry. Before they crashed, they funded all the psychedelic research. And now we're seeing that psychedelic research starting to come to roost and big studies coming out. Major institutions putting out much larger scale studies than we've ever seen before. And so the science on the ground is better than ever. The stocks are lower than they've ever been in history. And you have the opportunity right now in this space where $1 trillion industry is beginning, just like the automobile industry, the internet, crypto. When these $1 billion industries start, if you get into the good companies early, just put them away. That's going to be your retirement in the future.
You talk about bigger and more extensive research that's being done. Before we get into that, I've asked this question before, and I'd like to ask it again. What have we learned so far about this industry from a business investment standpoint, and what you anticipate, not just on what you think, but as you said, you've worked in New York. You're an entrepreneur. You're a thought leader in this space. You have access to some of the most influential people in this space. So what is some of the narrative or dialogue that you're hearing that shows promise, that backs up with what you're saying?
So one of the most exciting things is the phone calls and meetings and opportunities that I've been having with major insurance companies. And what's exciting
Mm.
about the insurance companies is these are the only guys who are bigger than the pharmaceutical companies and their lobbyists. So people are always concerned that, hey, we're up against the pharmaceutical lobby. But the reality is these insurance companies, the giants, these guys are paying for all this stuff that doesn't work, and they're sick of it. So people like US Healthcare, all these big guys, they're starting to do their own side-by-side trials, and I've helped them put some of this stuff together, but they're side-by-siding, say, ketamine, because they know if they can prove themselves that ketamine low dose works like it's being reported, then they don't want to pay for expensive antipsychotic medications, talk therapy, people going to the emergency room on a Friday night with a panic attack. It's a huge waste of money. So they know that if they can use ketamine to kind of, be a disruptor for addiction and a disruptor for PTSD and depression, and then they can use things like psilocybin microdose to phase out the antidepressants, they're excited, they're ready, they're making investments. And I want to make the point that psychedelics right now for mental health and addiction is the only positive story that we have right now in
Yeah.
society. And
So
so,
you're hearing right now that insurance companies are excited about this industry, correct?
yeah, they are really excited because this is the opportunity they've really been looking for. Because what happened is people think maybe there's a conspiracy of the government and the medical establishment and the pharmaceuticals to keep you away from these psychedelic medicines. I don't think that's the truth. I
No.
think there's a lack of education and information. And the doctors who we're looking at for guidance here, the FDA and the HHS, these are doctors. Doctors don't even know about nutrition, okay? And that could solve 90% of the problems that they have. So why would
Mm-hmm.
I think they know about psychedelics? They don't. It's our job as the community, as the industry, to continue to educate these people, to bring the studies forward. And as Mr. Wonderful said at Benzinga when we were there together, he said, only invest in the companies that have the money or the access to capital to do the work. Just having a good idea or a good management team, it's not going to cut it in this space. But if you can buy a good company right now, like I said, it's like buying the pharma companies from the 1920s or the biotech companies from the 1990s. Buy quality, put it away, and when you look up, these companies are going to be, large pharma companies that fund your retirement if you buy now.
Ben, he touches on companies. You want to add to that on what companies that you watch closely within this space, and feel free to chime in as well with some of your feedback, Zappy.
Yeah, the companies I watch the most are obviously the companies that are most cashed up because they have most shots on goals. They generally have the biggest pipelines, and they're at least advanced enough so that when they have to raise money again, and their research assumingly moves forward, then they're going to have access to capital. So you're looking at Compass, which is just going into phase 3. They announced their phase 3 plans, where the trial is going to be, the trial design, and that's exciting. That's going to start next year. Obviously, something like a Thai, which trimmed a little bit of the fat of their pipeline and narrowed it down a little bit, but they still have multiple studies going on, and they're dosing their phase 1s and getting into their phase 2s. That's another one. Cybin, I think you have to look at that. Doug's doing a great job over there. So those are the top 3. Numinous, I have to shout out Numinous because they're on the scale of the facilitator of the medicine, and that's going to be very important too. I think the clinical model that they specialize in is going to be something that is here to stay, especially if ketamine gets sponsored by the insurance company and things like that. So those would be 4 companies capitalized, and the facilitators of medicine is what I'm looking at.
Zappy, Ben mentioned Compass Pathways. They have detailed plans for their phase 3 psilocybin-assisted therapy trial to begin next year. In your opinion, is this research advancing to the point where we're going to expect to see some real breakthroughs from what we've seen, I guess, in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I think, the interesting thing here is that there have been some research that came out recently that was semi large scale. And it was so funny because it came out, and this comes back to the education. It came out and they said, well, it looks like psilocybin mushrooms are only as effective as antidepressants. And they were like, so that's not a big deal. And I was like, well, it's a big deal because these don't have side effects like your antidepressants that are getting people suicidal
Good point.
ideation.
Good
Yeah.
point.
So it's crazy. It's like people can't even look at things in a way that makes sense yet. So we have to keep pushing. I come back to, what Ben was saying. Capitalized companies are going to have the best opportunity. I have, 5 companies I've put together this Zappy Times newsletter for people to check out, where you're going to be able to see the companies that I'm involved with, the ones I like. But I think, from the big company standpoint, if you look at, say, a Thai Life Sciences, instead of just maybe betting on Compass Pathways, because they really have, one feature that they're really dedicated to, where a Thai who owns a large percentage of Compass, so you get that action right there by owning a Thai, but they've also got 3 or 4 other trials going on. They're carrying like something like a, few $100 million market cap. And so if any one of those drugs gets developed and becomes a multi-billion-dollar drug, you're going to have a tremendous return. And so I just keep saying to people, play it safe. A company like a Thai, that's like owning an ETF, an exchange traded fund for the
Yep.
industry. I think that, there is an ETF in the industry. If you want to play it really safe, that's another way to go, and not even, just put it away. But to this point, because psychedelics are the main positive story, even if the stock market were to shut down, a global meltdown, there would still be money available for bioscience, for mental health and addiction,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what happens.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening here. So it's really exciting because you can say to yourself, well, I don't have to watch the market, I don't have to look at this stuff, but I know if I buy a good company that's in the bioscience of addiction or mental health, I can sit back and, let things progress the way they're going.
June of 2021, a Thai, it was 2021, correct? I think, yeah. A Thai goes public on the NASDAQ IPO, and I think it opened up around 15, 16 bucks. And today we're looking at under $3. $3. And they're cashed up, well diversified. And like you said, if the research proves to be a breakthrough and effective, I'm not pushing it. I'm not giving people investment advice. But it's pretty surreal to think of what something like that in a company like that, what it's currently trading at.
Really crazy. Yeah. I was going to say, just coming back again to the opportunity here is you have to find some unique things that make sense over time. And for me, what I'm doing personally is I've involved myself with the Mind Army, which is a nonprofit that's fighting for the right to pursue happiness. We want legalization now for the mental health and addiction crises we're going through. We're not going to sit here in 2022 and have people tell us that alcohol's good, tobacco's good, but psilocybin's not good and it's off the table. You can't even use it if your family's in crisis. We just call no on that. So that's the moment we're in, and that's how I'm pushing to try to move this industry forward. The other thing I'm doing is I'm involved with a company called Psycheceutical. This is a publicly traded company. The symbol is BWVI. And what Psycheceutical is doing is they own patents that work in the pharma space. They've licensed them over for the psychedelic space. And this is really exciting because this is really going to clean up a lot of the dosing issues, these patents. And so when I was starting out in this industry, my first boss, Mike Milken, the philanthropist, financier, I sent him all the research and he said, Zappy, my best advice for you is to go find some intellectual property that could help the whole industry. And I looked for 2-3 years and I found this Psycheceutical. I saw their patents. I was like, wow, this is how accurate dosing and targeting is going to happen. This is what our industry needs. Because a doctor, even if they're 100% convinced that a psilocybin mushroom is going to be good for you, they don't want to hand you a bag of mushrooms and say, hey, take 2 caps and a stem and let me know how it goes. They need these compounds to look like a pharmaceutical. And so psychoceutical is on top of moving forward of making these look like pharmaceuticals, having attributes of being able to layer particles, nanoparticles, and release the layers over time. So you can immediately do microdosing very accurately. You can combine multiple psychedelics in the same, drops, tincture, topical. You take it once, it's nano, goes into your blood, and then each half hour, or 2 hours, it releases the next layer. And so instead of having to take a lozenge of ketamine, let's say, every hour or two to try to be compliant, you take the drops one time and you don't do anything. And that's what this industry needs. The patent that Psychoceutical has from University of Michigan, this was developed for oncology cancer drugs to try to make a chemotherapy drug without side effects. And this is what they came up with. And it's amazing because it doesn't go through your stomach and your liver. And that's where all these problems are really happening.
Okay.
So if you can eliminate that and allow for, they can change the molecule, the psychoceutical patent, you can make the molecules any size and any shape. And they found that triangular shaped molecules in cancer drugs exponentially uptake versus the round ones. So we
Why is
have
that?
we are working on the science of why, but the reality is you can give somebody a much smaller dose in triangular shaped molecules and get more bioavailability.
Wow.
And the second very controversial thing that Psychoceutical is taking on, which is great for the industry, is the first drug that we're doing clinicals with is a topical ketamine. It's called neurodirect ketamine. You put it at the back of the neck, at the base of the hairline, and like no other place on your body, when it goes right there at the base of the hairline, it goes into the free nerve tissue directly to the brain. So it avoids, again, the stomach, the liver, the whole thing, and you immediately get an effect. But what it does is, because it's not systemic, it takes out the psychedelic effect. It takes out the nausea and the dizziness, which means this opens it up to elderly people, adolescents, people who are afraid of psychedelics, to get the benefit of ketamine, all that neural metabolizing and neurogenesis. They get to have it without taking time off work, having some experience. Just, this is the type of science that I'm excited about that's being tested now. And we all as a society get to benefit right now because there's nothing else we can do to stop people from getting addicted to fentanyl, let's say. Mm-hmm. They're getting an injury, then they get pills from a doctor, they run out and they get them on the street and they're laced, and now they're addicted to fentanyl. They're not drug addicts, they're just regular people. And it's happening millions of people. So if we have ibogaine, this African root, which can break a fentanyl addiction in a single treatment, we have to make this available. We can't just say, well, it was made illegal in 1971 with a bunch of other drugs, so I guess, we'll just leave it on there and not access it. And I did a recent interview with Rick Doblin from MAPS, who's like the godfather of the modern psychedelic movement. And we talked about ibogaine, and he told me that ibogaine had been accidentally scheduled with the rest of the psychedelics in 71, because the story goes, as Rick says, there were some drug dealers that were addicted to heroin. They got some ibogaine to break their addiction. They did it, and then the police raided their place and said, hey, put everything in here on the Schedule 1, heroin, LSD, ibogaine. And they put this ibogaine on there that has been proven to be non-addictive, sold over the counter in the 1950s under the brand Lambrine, completely safe and non-addictive. Why is it on Schedule 1 and we have an opiate fentanyl crisis? We have to address this with the science that we know works. And so that's why the Mind Army, our number one task right now is getting ibogaine descheduled to battle this fentanyl. Straight up, ibogaine will crush it. And Psychoceutical, the company I talked about, the BWVI, they've got a patent where the second one after the neurodirect ketamine right here, they're doing neurodirect ibogaine and doing ibogaine with the nano-layered particles. That means you get to give people less of the medicine, but get all of the bioavailability. And this is what our industry needs. We need to move forward together And as I actually putting forward an open letter to the psychedelic community saying, let's band together for legalization. Because if we can get ibogaine descheduled, if we can get psilocybin, descheduled or rescheduled, now we have the opportunity for doctors to research it and access it for patients. And this is going to change everything. So we have to be willing right now to do the hard part, which is continue to educate the medical establishment and the government. We've got a president whose son was saved, Hunter Biden's life was saved with ketamine treatments and ibogaine. Exactly what I gave Lamar Odom in my documentary, Lamar Odom Reborn. And so, Joe Biden and all these people, they have to recognize that every family now has somebody in the family that's dealing with addiction and needs this kind of help. We cannot go back to trying to talk about it and, be, abstinence. This is fentanyl.
Yeah.
This is super addictive. We have
So
to break
Zappy,
it with what we have.
are we at a place where I know a couple of years ago all the psilocybin stocks, they ran up, and MindMed, LSD, anything associated with psychedelics ran up. The industry was in like a brief golden period, and then all the equities have drawn down as people realize that these are very long cycle research methods, and it takes a long time before you bring it from the research to past phase 3 and so on. But are we at the point now where, unlike say 12 months or 2 years ago, where there's more certainty? Is that the sense that you're getting, that it's an inevitability almost, that some of the small scale studies that we've seen that have proved efficacious, that instead of where there was a lot of doubt before, now it's a little bit like, yes, we know where this is going. It's only going to be a matter of time.
Yeah, I think we're right there. You described it perfectly. We are in that great moment where the understanding is there's been enough science done by the Johns Hopkins, the Yale, and all these incredible institutions that we just have to now change the education about it and change some of the laws about access. Because what we're seeing, that the results are better than ever. Like I said, even the psilocybin versus antidepressants, it was slightly better with the psilocybin with no side effects. You've got people looking at LSD for ADHD. These are like huge problems with millions of people doing it. And when you take the Adderall or you take these different pharmaceuticals, it's building up in your system, the antidepressants. You take them and they build up and they change your brain state. With the things like ketamine, we know that's out of your system within hours. These psilocybin, right out of your system. There's no residual damage happening. You're not changing your brain except adding these new dendrites and building these new neural pathways. So I think the risk is out. You've got to be patient because, there's huge things happening with legalization. You got Oregon voting on psilocybin coming up. You had Alberta in Canada doing something similar. You've got California going to put something on the ballot at some point. You've got the Biden administration asking Health and Human Services to deal with the fact that these are going to be legal.
As well. Colorado as well.
Yeah. So each one of these are going to be seismic moves for the industry and for the stocks. And what I'm telling people is get in now before one of these big trigger events moves everything much higher.
So I want to educate some of our viewers right now on the short-term potential growth for, say, for example, ketamine. So right now, a Schedule 1 drug for psychedelics is like LSD, MDMA, psilocybin, ibogaine, but ketamine is classified as a Schedule 2 drug, correct?
Actually, Schedule 3, Chad.
Schedule 3, excuse me. So what that then means is that we're starting to see an emergence of ketamine clinics opening up all across the United States. So what does that business model look like? How do you see that growing? And again, with some of the conversations that you're having, are we going to see a lot of clinics opening up? And could we see, and I know there already is works in the process of like at-home kits as well, and how that really works too. So what are some of the, I guess, some of the things you obviously have to be careful with if like there's some of these at-home kits and how they operate and how they work. But more importantly, the macro question is that what is the short-term growth opportunity for the industry pertaining to ketamine?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this is why, when you see the bioscience companies down overall, and then you see the psychedelic companies down even more, it's because people realize that a lot of this stuff is maybe years away. With ketamine, because it's Schedule 3, that means that it is available for doctors to use off-label. It's one of the top the top anesthetic used by oral surgeons and emergency rooms. When somebody comes in, they give them ketamine because it's FDA approved, it's fast acting, it doesn't affect your breathing, and they use it even on children because it wears off so fast and doesn't have these side effects. So what happened was Yale University did a big study, and they realized that a low dose of ketamine can break even treatment-resistant depression over 70% effective. So
70.
70, yeah.
Wow.
That's something that nothing else worked for. So this is a huge thing. And just to be clear for listeners, Schedule 1 means that something has no medical benefit and has the propensity for high addiction propensity. That's what it means to be on Schedule 1. Psychedelics are not addictive, and they are highly effective medically. So they're scheduled wrong in the first place. But a lot of times people say to me, hey, Zappy, well, maybe the government or the FDA, they just need more time. You know, it's been 55 years, but maybe they just need a little bit more time. That's why they haven't taken it off the schedule. And I'm like, well, if everything was non-political, then no medical benefit, highly addictive, that describes cigarettes to me. So how are cigarettes not on Schedule 1 when they're killing millions of people, no medical benefit and highly addictive? It's because we have a political situation going on here. And from what I'm told, it wasn't even the pharmaceutical companies that did it. It was really the alcohol companies who realized in the early 70s that psychedelics, that cannabis, psychedelics were going to disrupt their business. And if ibogaine can break an alcohol addiction, you know, alcoholics is like their, you know, number one customer. So they don't want to do that. And so I look at it and say, hey, you know what? The past is the past. But if we have things that we know are safe and effective against mental health and addiction, then we have to step up to the plate right now and allow people to access these immediately. And ketamine, it's a great business model. Coming back to your question here, was because ketamine is number one side effect is it breaks suicidal ideation. It's effective against all kinds of, you know, PTSD and anxiety and all kinds of things. Because it's FDA approved, you've got doctors using it very effectively around the country. But the reason I'm involved with a company called KetaMD, they're merged with Braxia up in Canada. That company is, you know, Braxia realized that even though they have clinics and they're expanding their clinic footprint, in order to really penetrate and go into people's homes, have people available to do it without having to come into a doctor's office and get breathed on and sit there for hours while they wait.
Yeah.
If you can give this to people at home in a safe way, like KetaMD does, where they got a nurse on telemed, the doctor's over telemed, they ship you one lozenge at a time and they guide you, you can have an incredible experience without taking days off of work and costing yourself all kinds of money.
So that's how it would work then. That's how it would work then.
Yeah, it's a big deal because you're talking about probably 100 million people in this country right now that could use ketamine because
you believe that 100 million, really?
100 million. There's science out of China, and Dr. Roger McIntyre is who's the CEO at Braxia. He's got a 400-person study going in Canada with psilocybin mushrooms. He's done ketamine trials in China, and he's written over 700 papers on mood disorders. So I was like, that's why we came together with Roger, because you've got to, you know, Compass Pathways, they probably only have 300 or 400 people in their psilocybin thing. Braxia is about to have a bigger one in Canada. So these are cool opportunities, but the science on the ketamine that comes out of China says you have an area of your brain called the default mode network. And in there's a mechanism called your lateral habenula. And your lateral habenula is recording all the stress you've ever had in your whole life. When it becomes too much, it puts your brain into burst mode. And when your brain's in burst mode, it cuts off your dopamine production completely. That's your happiness, your motivation. The first time you do medical ketamine, it takes your brain out of burst mode and you immediately start getting dopamine again. And so, you know, we get this call all the time, where the husband or the wife the next day, they're like, call us up and they're like, oh my God, he just cleaned the attic. He's been claiming he's going to do that for 5 years. Whatever you're doing, keep going. But really, they came out of burst mode, started to get their dopamine, and now they're back in, instead of being a drain to their family and society, now they're back in the game and they're a positive attribute. And my boss, Mike Milken, used to always say, human capital is how you grow your valuation. And so how do you affect human capital in a corporation in a quick and effective way is psychedelics. And I've been lucky enough to do ketamine group sessions with Silicon Valley executive teams. And there's a company right now in Utah called Hemp Lucid. It's a CBD company where I put all their executive team through with a doctor through ketamine treatments. And now they've made it part of their HR, and they've had over 35 employees do their ketamine for HR.
Wow.
The company's thriving, and the cohesiveness and the camaraderie and the empathy are sky high in that company. And I think when you want to move the needle on your company, you have to seriously consider, like, how are you going to support the mental health of your employees? And psychedelics is the best and most effective way.
Wow. Well, to back up a lot of the information that you shared, just for our viewers, it was announced that you were added, actually, was it last month or earlier? You were added to the Benzinga Psychedelic Advisory Council. Actually, I think it was created back in March, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I was really honored to be added there, like you said.
So the council, just so people understand, it's formed in an effort to collect insight and developments involving the industry, and it will feature some of the most notable names and thought leaders, which you're obviously part of that council. So what do you think overall this council will achieve for the industry going forward?
I'm hoping that it can create this more cohesiveness among the industry players. I've got a letter going out on Benzinga, an open letter to the psychedelic community saying we have to address the tie-dye elephant in the room. I think Amanda Siebert said that. We all have to address it. That is the legalization situation, and the fact that if psychedelics are legal, it opens up the value of this industry and for all these companies an exponentially bigger opportunity. So let's fight for that now. And my open letter says basically, let's band together as an industry. Let's get ibogaine descheduled so we set a precedent for how these things are looked at and how they're rescheduled or descheduled. And then all the other compounds can go through there. And I think if we put a win on the board for the psychedelic industry of getting ibogaine descheduled because it shouldn't be there anyways, if we put that win on the board as a group, it's going to be a really strong thing. And I think if anything, if that Benzinga Council can bring us as an industry together, I think this is where maybe cannabis missed the mark, which is there was too much competition and infighting and that kind of thing. But psychedelic medicine, it's such a big opportunity. It's all about mental health, and people understand that this is so big that they don't have to fight it like a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
And so, for example, as I said, psychoceutical, what I'm excited about is anybody can license psychoceuticals patents to deliver their drugs in a safer, more effective way. So when Cybin or MindMed or Atai gets finally approval, then they're like, okay, now how are we going to dose this? It's very important that they're dosing in a way that is targeted, effective, and something that the medical industry can feel good about. And I think if we can move that forward with podcasts like yours shining light on this industry, things like Benzinga, we're going to have that cohesiveness that the cannabis industry didn't have. And what I love is right now on the consumer side, where people were in the past told cannabis is bad and it rots your brain, and now it's legal and older people, boomers, are trying it. People like Michael Pollan, who put out his Netflix special, How to Change Your Mind. As these people are trying psychedelics in their 60s and realizing, oh, wow, this is for mental health and wellness, they're not resistant anymore like they used to be because they realized that cannabis, they were told one thing and it was really another. So now they're just diving headfirst into psychedelic medicine.
Ben, you want to add anything to that?
No, that's well said. I think anything that can bring the industry together, I think that would be good. And I think you touch on a very interesting point that, to me, from a outsider who follows the industry, it looks a little bit like there's a little defensiveness on patents. You know what I mean? It's like a lot of these companies are trying to develop NCEs, which are new chemical elements that are a little bit different than the original psychedelic. And there's some sort of defensiveness, whether, if we allow psilocybin, then the drugs won't be anything. But what you're saying, it has a very valid point, that legalize it, get it out there, get everybody the right to use it, and then the rest will follow, right? So
Yeah.
it's really about access, and really it's the access that unlocks everything downstream, not trying to keep everything in-house. Is that what I'm gathering?
Such a good point. Exactly. If, all the studies shouldn't cost what they cost. When you're doing a study with psychedelic medicine, the cost of the product itself can be cost prohibitive because of how much it costs you for a gram or an ounce of these things that on the street they'd be a few dollars, and you're paying like tens of thousands of dollars because we have this, situation with the scheduling being wrong. So we fix that, and now we have a really, an easy place for research and development to take place. And I think patents are really important because somebody has to spend the money and do those clinical trials, and they're very expensive to prove these things out. But at the end of the day, we need these things to be tested. And the first step is legalization. And then the second step is, just get down to the research as fast and hard as we can as a society and an industry.
Miami, a couple weeks away. Look
Can't
forward
wait.
to seeing you. I love your energy. The world needs more Zappy in it, does it not?
I love it. Thank you, guys. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, I'm Zappy Zapolin on social media. Follow me there. Check out the new Zappy Times podcast and newsletter to, let you follow along and play the right stocks and get in there now.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. So what'd you think of the interview? If there's any information that you want to know more of or want to learn about, then provide us with feedback by leaving a comment below. And if you like what we're producing, then feel free to subscribe to our channel, share this video with your network, and as well, click on that bell for all notifications because we would not be here without you. We appreciate it. Thanks for watching, everyone.